Hello, it's Scott Manley here. While SpaceX are in the middle of their DM2 launch campaign, they continue to test Starship down in Texas. And things had been going pretty well. They were up to their 5th successful test fire. Since they started testing this, they had swapped out the engine with a new one, and they'd added this heavy mass simulator at the top to try and make the vehicle balance more like the full thing with the nose cone. So this footage is from NASAspaceflight.com. They've been doing live coverage with camera work by Boca Chica Mary, Boca Chica Gal. So after that test, everything was fine until about 90 seconds later, at which point the tank started leaking cryogenic propellant profusely. It looked like it was spraying out. Now, there's two types of cryogens in there. There's liquid oxygen and there's liquid methane. And if liquid oxygen leaks, that's fine. But liquid methane, if it leaks, it is highly combustible. And if it finds an ignition source, then bad things are going to happen. And that's exactly what happened. And first things first, nobody was injured as far as we know. We were very concerned about the camera people that were running these volunteer streams, but all of them were fine. And also, this is absolutely nothing to do with the SpaceX launch with crew to the space station that is, again, scheduled for either Saturday or Sunday, hopefully, if the weather allows them. This is a completely different piece of rocket technology which is being rapidly developed, where they're building them quickly, they're testing them quickly, and yeah, then they're getting destroyed in some way, so they're going to the next one. So anyway, of course, I want to go and try to break this down from different camera angles we have. This is from Boca Chica Gal, also working with the NASA Spaceflight, and I want you to listen to the audio here. We have the event, and then there's a delay as the sound travels across the distance. That was the main blast, but listen a little longer. And there's a secondary blast there. There's two explosions. We'll talk a little more about that second explosion later. First of all, I want to talk about this leak. So what is breaking there? When I first saw this, I thought what had happened was the tank had ruptured again because they'd been having problems with welds under pressure in the tank breaking. But this wasn't the welds. This was the connection to the ground service equipment, the plumbing that loads propellant or removes propellant. And that had broken in such a way that this was spraying out a lot of methane. So now I want to slow things down, take it one frame at a time. We see that the initial ignition happens underneath the vehicle. Now, there was an engine that had just fired there 90 seconds ago. It might still have had some hot spots, but then again, it did get a lot of cryogenic methane sprayed around there, so it might not have been that hot anymore. Regardless, we all know that's where it started. A lot of people thought it was the flare stack, but you can see the flare stack is out there, it's untouched. From there, the combustion moves out in all directions through this gas cloud. It's mixed with the atmospheric oxygen, and the flame front looks like it's moving supersonic, so we do get some high energy shock fronts. Initially, it's obviously atmospheric oxygen, but of course the tank ruptures. And if you look up the top, you can see the mass simulator, that like block that was sitting on top, moving upwards without the rest of the rocket attached. That is, of course, just the largest piece of debris, or at least the heaviest piece of debris. There are many large panels seen flying around, and you can see when they catch the light that these are basically, stainless steel plates that made up some of the tanks or bulkheads inside the vehicle. And we'll get to see some more of what this place looked like afterwards. Also note, in the bottom right, the blast, the shockwave, has actually extinguished the flame on the flare stack. And now if you look carefully at the fireball, you'll see it increase in magnitude for a moment. That is the secondary explosion that we heard in the Boca Chica Gal video. And to give you another idea of pressure effect, watch these three water tanks at the front. There's three caps on top of each of these. They're called the Three Amigos, by the way. And as the pressure wave hits them, it squeezes the tanks and pops those off the top. Also, if you look to the right, you'll see a COPV, a pressure vessel, fly past as it's venting gas there. That would be the liquid nitrogen pressure vessels that are used for, operating pneumatics. Thankfully, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of damage to the ground service equipment, because Obviously, they're running these tests with only partial fuel loads for safety reasons, but the tank farm could easily contain enough propellant to entirely fill that rocket. Those black tanks in front, I believe those are just water that's being used for the deluge system. If you look carefully, you can actually see a spout of water coming out the side of one of them. But yeah, some of these tanks might contain liquid nitrogen, they might contain liquid oxygen or methane. And you really wouldn't want those methane fuel tanks to be ruptured. So now I want to talk about the mass simulator. This photo from Boca Chica Gal shows us what's inside there. It's a couple of rolls of the stainless steel they used to build Starship. And that's about 10 tons for each of those rolls. That sits on top of the front bulkhead. And when the explosion starts, it has so much inertia that the tank actually moves up. And it pretty much stays still for a few frames before it realizes that the tank is being rammed up into it. But then everything is consumed in fire, and there's a shockwave that actually passes. And once that clears, we see the mass simulator is now pretty much moving upwards on its own without the help of any booster pushing it. And it's actually going pretty fast. Now we switch to another camera by S Padre from South Padre Island. They have a webcam, check their channel. You can see the mass simulator fly off the top of the screen and now fall back and land, and it's actually coincidental with a second burst of flame there. And this actually lines up with the audio on the other video, so you might ask, how does a big chunk of metal make like a secondary explosion? I think either there was a lot of liquid on the ground and when that hit it caused it to splash, or maybe they actually hit the booster on the way back down. I haven't seen where the mass simulator is. It should probably be pretty robust against falling that distance. Also, we can use the laws of physics to figure out how fast it was propelled upwards. We take the time of flight of about 7 seconds and we can assume that aerodynamics is negligible. After all, it is a 20-ton block of solid steel, and based on that, it was probably projected upwards at about 110 kilometers per hour or 70 miles per hour. Now, to explain how this 20-ton block of steel was sent skywards without the rest of the tankage, I'm going to use Everyday Astronaut's video, and he was having the film taken by South Padre Island as well, but his camera was recording at 120 frames per second, so we have much better slow motion. We also have a different angle. So here's the zoomed in section. What happens is the explosion underneath pushes the entire tank structure up and it compresses against this. And when that compression happens, it ruptures the top of the pressurized methane tank, and you see a jet of methane pushing that off like a cork. And that jet also acts like a rocket thruster, pushing the tank back down, stopping it from going flying. It actually ends up on the ground very, very quickly. And of course, that jet of fuel bursts into flames very, very quickly. I think that's a COPV flying away as well. Using this video, we can also show that the combustion was likely a supersonic detonation process. If you look at that cloud of gas on the left side of the booster, we can actually see the flame propagating sideways through that, and since we know the size of the rocket, we can measure the speed of that, and you're just using some rough calculations, it shows up to be about Mach 2 to Mach 3 in air, and that's probably fast enough to qualify as supersonic inside the methane atmosphere mixture. So yes, that is a legit detonation. But you don't even need to do the math, because if you watch, you can see a shock wave that gets generated from that lateral thing. If I adjust the color curves, you can see the shape of that. Now, if you think about it, this was generated by a combustion traveling sideways. If it was traveling at the speed of sound, it would produce a shock wave at an angle of 45 degrees to the ground. If the angle is less than 45 degrees, then it must have been moving faster than the speed of sound in air. So where it's more horizontal, it was burning faster. And some people have taken this very rapid combustion to be indication that the spill was liquid oxygen and liquid methane, because it's much harder to get the exact ratio to produce a detonation with just atmospheric oxygen. Again, this is not my footage. This is Tim Dodd, Everyday Astronaut. He took it. I'm just analysing it, and he usually lets me do this. Check out his channel. So yeah, you can also see another shockwave here. See that sort of pink glow that is travelling upwards, that is actually another shock front that we are seeing from the side. It's actually pretty hard to see because we're so close in, but there's another TV crew that managed to get this. Now, that is your classic hemispherical blast wave. So, what I think we're seeing here is as the high pressure shock wave moves away from the target, it begins to form a low pressure rarefaction wave behind it, and in that low pressure zone, the moisture in the air condenses out and forms a fog, and that fog is being illuminated by the giant fireball behind it. That's why we get this pink hemisphere of mist that's travelling out faster than the speed of sound. Now, we haven't seen anyone from SpaceX return to the site so far, but we have got some photos of what's left. It's very clear the lower oxygen tank has completely ruptured. The skirt is actually still there, as is the lower bulkhead and thrust puck, and the upper tank is still in one piece. Obviously, it's got a big hole in the top where the mass simulator was. Okay, so to finish off, I'm going to go to Lab Padres and we're going to talk about what I think actually happened. So this is the test. They were going to perform a static fire engine test, and you see it there kicking up a whole bunch of dust. They start venting the tank down, it blows away all the condensation, and then the air starts to clear. Now, this is performed with only a limited amount of fuel. You can see this is not full of cryogenic propellants because the whole tank isn't covered in frost. I don't think their problem was directly related to the test. I think the builds that they've come up with have been much more solid. Sure, they had the first few where the welds were problems, but now the tanks have been able to handle the pressure, the thrust structure is fine. They just whacked that whole thing with 200 tons of thrust and it's still standing and just operating fine. So at this point, they've tested, they've done their stuff for the day, and they're going to have to then begin thinking about detanking this to remove the propellant that's in there. So they have to make adjustments to start bringing the propellant out. And I think at this point, something goes wrong, there's a mistake in their procedures, or somebody flips the wrong valve, or even they close a valve too quickly, and the fluid hammer effect causes a transient pressure to break their ground service connections. And at this point, they're just spraying out propellant, either from the tank or from the tank farm. But this is a large amount of liquid methane flowing along the ground, possibly with liquid oxygen as well. And it's only a matter of time until a spark, until it finds an ignition source, and then that's what causes the explosion. We have been amazed at how quickly they have been building out these Starship prototypes, but you have to remember, they are having to develop everything from scratch. They built up their tank farm, and it's not just the physical hardware, but their procedures have been developed very, very quickly and adjusted over time. And I think that it's just a consequence of the very rapid development that mistakes are made, even if it's not a design mistake or a fabrication mistake in the flight hardware. It could be a mistake in their procedures that led to an overpressure in a pipe, a breakage of the quick detach, plumbing, and fuel spraying out everywhere and causing problems. I'm not sure we're going to get to see the exact details, but we will probably see the next test stand gets set up and SN5 on it and testing, and maybe it will fly. Maybe. That would be really cool. So look, I gotta say once again, thanks to everybody that is down there and covering this. I couldn't do this without you. I am grateful to all your work. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.